Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. The Tennessee Vols heading into 2025. Dill just seem to be a team that everybody's sleeping on. Now, you look across the SEC landscape, there are some flashier teams, right? Florida with DJ Lagware, Lenore Sellers in South Carolina. I feel like everybody's just sold their stock on Nico and kind of just talking this Tennessee team up to like not a competitive team in the SEC. Now, I have question marks about Tennessee. You are a believer in Tennessee, and I'll give you credit because you were a believer in Tennessee as well going into last year too. The thing that stands out to me, the more work I do with Tennessee is yes, they lose some line of scrimmage football players that were very good on both sides of the football. But I feel like what people forget or people maybe just don't know is what Tennessee has done on the recruiting trail, recruiting the line of scrimmage over the last couple of classes where you look both on the offensive line and the defensive line and say it's blue chip city. And so there are kind of some reasons on paper. There are questions that you can have about Tennessee, but when you start getting into this roster, there's actually a lot to like. Want to get into it before we do, and as always, just want to say thank you to you guys and to the Tennessee fans. I am interested to hear what the level of optimism is about this football team going into 2025. Appreciate you guys checking it out. Let it fly in the comment section if y'all do enjoy the content. Consider subscribing to the channel. Dill, to me, the biggest question about this Tennessee team, it doesn't have to do with Nico, and we're going to get to Nico in a little bit, but I want to talk about this rushing attack. I mean, the Tennessee fans who follow this program closely, they know how good this rushing attack was, and they know how much Tennessee ran the football last year. I feel like the national media probably doesn't appreciate it. Tennessee ran the football 60% of snaps. It was 14th most in the country. You lose 3 starters on the offensive line. You lose one of the best running backs in the country in Dylan Sampson. Sell the people on this Tennessee rushing attack going into 2025.
Now, this is no shot at Dylan Sampson because he was awesome.
He's a
And
dude.
St. Louis, there's still things you probably need to see, and we know he's got the athleticism to be a bit of a big game runner, if you will, or a big play creator from the running back spot, because that was one thing I feel like is highly underrated for what Dylan Sampson was doing. But I look at kind of how he could grind it out on teams like Georgia in that game. That's what Tennessee needs. They need to be able to stay on schedule, run the ball physically. I think you know that you're going to get that from him. Now, can he take that next step and be a little bit more explosive in terms of how he runs the ball? That's probably what I'm looking for in terms of him replacing Dylan Sampson's production. But at the bare minimum, I think he'll give you what Tennessee needs him to give you, and that is a really physical runner.
So my question, though, is not because I'm a Peyton Lewis guy. The Tennessee fans who've been rocking with the boys for the last 2 years, we broke down Peyton Lewis, was buying stock in Peyton Lewis coming out of high school. I don't really have all that much question marks about the running back room. Mine is the offensive line where you lose some road graders. A guy like Spraggins, he was moving bodies off the line of scrimmage. The same thing with John Franklin. Does this offensive line run? Can they move bodies the way they were in the 2024 years? Probably more of the question I have about this rushing attack going into the 2025 year.
And you have that. I mean, I think every good team loses good players. If you're a playoff team, you lose good players. I look at what Tennessee's done in terms of developing offensive linemen, been really, really good, especially physicality. There's certainly some room in terms of pass protection for them to get better. I thought it was a really weak unit in that respect last year. But at least from a physicality standpoint, Tennessee offensive linemen in Heupel's tenure have been physical players. So I look William Satterwhite or Max Anderson. I expect physicality from those two. Sam Pendleton, I think, is a very underrated. If I were to pick one of those Notre Dame guards who hit the portal, Coogan, Spindler, Pendleton, easily Pendleton for me. A little bit younger, I think, showed a little bit more flashes. Again, another guy who probably has to improve in pass protection, but a good physical player. Then look out for Jesse Perry. I know we all want to talk about David Sanders, and I'm excited about David Sanders. Everybody in the world would be excited to have David Sanders on their team. But Jesse Perry, I think this is going to be a very competitive battle for that right tackle spot because I look at what Jesse Perry did as kind of an underdeveloped tackle recruit as a true freshman last year. I think they have something with him. I think he's a good physical player. I think is athletic enough to not be a liability in the pass protection game. I think that's going to be an interesting battle. But at the bare minimum, I think he did play good physical football for a freshman.
Yeah, the thing with this offensive line when you start getting into it, because y'all know I'm a Michigan guy. Like Michigan wanted Max Anderson, Michigan wanted Bennett Warren, Michigan was trending for both of those guys until Tennessee stole them away from the boys. They're good football players. So yes, you have question marks about like proven production and starts, but you do have the adequate bodies on the offensive line that I don't think people appreciate enough. Number two, I mean, we're 5 minutes in. We're supposed to be selling the people on Tennessee. We haven't even talked about Nico, so let's get into it. Nico in 2024. Sell me on Nico taking some steps.
I'll flip you a question to answer this question. Do you think people maybe got a little stuck on that first half of the Alabama game and decided Nico like stinks? Because he did play poorly in that first half of that game. I'm not going to get up and defend that performance. They probably beat Alabama by like 20 plus points. If he plays good football that game, especially in the first half, he didn't. He missed some easy throws. But I think down to like towards the end of the year, and I don't think things were going perfectly for him from what was going on around him. I think, again, as I said, the pass protection was horrible. Like I go to that Georgia game, I think I counted they dropped like 4 first down catches. Like that's just an unacceptable number, I'd probably say, from a team. I think the wide receiver play can just be better because they'll be more talented. And they had some older vets who I don't think it worked. Like Brew McCoy never gave you wildly consistent play. Dante Thornton dropped way too many passes. Squirrel White, I don't think, had a great year in 2024. I think you look, Braylon Staley, Mikey Matthews, like you just get better wide receiver play. I think that goes a long way. And I just don't see how they can get that much worse pass pro because they were horrible.
You asked me a question, didn't give me a chance to answer the question. So
I'm saying, do you think people quit on him too early and don't
factor in I actually do.
Weak things are?
And I'm not expunging because I think a lot of the Tennessee fans were like, well, look, Nico didn't play the way I think we all expected him to play. And I think that's fair. Like, I don't think Nico had the year we expected, but I think the expectations were so sky high in this kid. I think we forgot he's a first-year starter, only year 2 as a college football player. If I were to sell the Tennessee fans, I'd point at Cade Klubnik. I mean, Cade Klubnik, another 5-star quarterback that in his second year of college football is a year 1 starter and struggled in that 2023 year. Well, guess what happened to Cade going into 2024? One, year 2 as a starter, you're going to get better as a quarterback as you get more reps and experience. The offensive line got better around him. The pass catchers got better around him. And all of a sudden, Cade Klubnik played so he was one of the better quarterbacks in the country in the 2024 season. You know, people were talking about Cade the same way people are talking about Nico right now. I'm selling stock, 5-star bust. There are some reasons to be optimistic that Nico puts it together in 2025. And Dill,
and one thing people I think severely underrate is like his winner's mentality. I think to it, like
he's a gamer.
I look at that Ohio State game and like that just being a gamer and being tough in a really tough environment where the defense is playing horrible, your offensive line's not playing particularly well, you're not running the ball particularly well, and him kind of like making some plays with his legs to kind of just like will that team. And again, it wasn't a wildly competitive game, and Ohio State was great. They were playing really well by that point. But I think there's like a little bit more of those like intangibles that people are almost like sleeping on. Because again, I think, and rightfully so to an extent, he did play poorly at times in certain games. But I do think, like, again, if you just like assume the year 2 progression, I think there's a lot more to his game than people kind of think, and like kind of having that winner's mentality. Yeah. I think is really important.
I think the question I'd have is like for Clemson, it was like the pass catchers got significantly better. Does that happen for Tennessee? And it very well could. Like there's a very real reality where like Mike Matthews comes in and year 2 plays like a 5-star wide receiver. I was a big fan of Amari Jefferson coming out. He's transferring in from Alabama. Chris Bradshaw was a guy I was a big fan of transferring in last year. And so like I do like the wide receiver room. Can they be a very good room and help Nico out? That's probably a question. And does Nico just take that step going into year 2? Last big question I have, because this was another really underappreciated unit for Tennessee last year, and that was this defensive line. When you go back and look at the numbers, they were top 5 in the country in terms of yards per carry, and they were only allowing 3 yards per carry. Elite unit that loses James Pierce, who might have been the best edge rusher in the country last year. They lose a guy like Norman Lott. They lose a guy like Amari Thomas. They lose a guy like Elijah Simmons. That's a lot of production that's moving on to the NFL. But then I start looking at the depth chart. and say, well, there's also a lot of guys that not only have played pretty good football for Tennessee, but there's also a lot of young talent, like the top 100 blue chip talent that is also coming through the pipeline. How big do you think the drop off is in terms of defensive line play going into 2025, if any?
I think the edge play is still going to be really good. I think bringing Josh Josephs back, you look at Caleb
He's
Herring,
great.
Jordan Ross. Caleb Herring flashed some real high level play, I think, at times, or at least high level athleticism and kind of capabilities. Jordan Ross, you've kind of always said it, like there wasn't going to be a year one guy. You kind of knew that about him, but he's got some high end juice, I think. My question will be like, again, I like what they have with Devin Hobbs, Bryce Neeson, and Jackson Moy. Can Devin Hobbs be dominant? That's probably question one. And then can Isaiah Campbell or Wallace or Robin, like one of these younger players in the middle, kind of step in and add some depth? Because that was a big part of why they were so good last year is they went like 6-7 deep in that interior defensive line.
Yeah.
Right now, you kind of have three guys I think you really feel good about. Who's going to be like that fourth, fifth guy?
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if that's a position. And you don't have to go out and get the best interior defensive line in the portal, but just another, capable body that can give you 15 to 20 quality snaps. Last question. This is probably the question where it's like good to great, right? Tennessee was a very good football team last year when they played Ohio State with all those weapons on the outside. It felt like specifically at the safety spot. I love the cornerbacks, especially Jermon McCoy gets healthy. And I'm not really sure what the timetable is there. He's one of the best cornerbacks in the country.
If Tennessee's me as good as I think he's going to be ready for the playoffs. So that's when Tennessee's going to have to make their hay in my mind.
Yeah. And is he the version that we saw in 2024, which was elite? The safeties are the concern, though. I'm fine with it. I love Buchard. I think Buchard is going to be a dog for Tennessee. The safety room, right? Because you saw at times like the safeties had to play some man coverage and just couldn't. They just couldn't run and chase the athletes that a team like Ohio State had. And the question is, look, when you play a lot of these teams in the SEC, you'll be just fine. But when you play a team like Texas in the playoffs, or you play a team like Ohio State or a team like Oregon potentially that has legitimate dudes at wide receiver, do you have the safety play to deal with that talent? That's probably the last question I have about this Tennessee team in terms of taking that step from being a solid college football playoff team to being a legitimate national title contender.
And that's probably my still open question. I think I have fair responses to your other questions, a lot of people's questions about this Tennessee team. I look at the safety. That's where my fundamental
address it.
And Jacoby Thomas, like he kind of has the traits and athleticism you're looking for. He missed so many tackles last year. I think his missed tackle rate was like 25%. That is far too high. I mean, that needs to get down. He needs to be more dependable and reliable for this team. And maybe he can. Year two in the system if he's just more comfortable doing what he's doing. But then around him, like Turrentine or Charles Christian, like those guys, they played a lot last year. I just don't think they quite had it. And again, it's not like Turrentine's a good, solid player. It's just, yeah, you saw them get exposed really badly against Ohio State, where Ohio State, if they got the ball in space, Tennessee was really struggling to chase them down and tackle them and get them to the ground. I think that same went for the linebackers, which I will say I think gets better. I think Edwin Spillman, I'll put my flag in the ground for him. I think he's got to start this year. He has the talent, the athleticism, the speed. Like if him and Arian Carter can just play with a little bit more instincts, I think that can be a really great group. But I'm still a little concerned about the safety spot because I don't really know like where you're looking. Like is Edris Farouk? I mean, you saw him play a little bit last year.
Yeah, but when you're talking about like that one question, because we have question marks, but there's not a team that we don't have question marks about going in. That's your question. It's probably the position you'd want to have question marks about. Dill, if Nico takes a step and if they can run the football the way they did last year and Nico takes a step, this team's going to be super dangerous. And again, it's just Nico's not the new novel quarterback anymore. Now it's DJ Lagway and Lenore Sellers and nobody talking about the Tennessee Vols.
I was going to say, people there's not a ton of quarterbacks going into 2025 that I have a ton of faith
in. Especially in the SEC. I mean, like the teams that
I feel better about him than a lot of these guys. I'll say
like that. Gunnar Stockton at Georgia, Bama, whatever Bama's going to be trying out there. All right, we'll close it out there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later.